What's going on, guys? My name is Nathan. You're watching yet another Salty Productions set review video for Tarkir Dragonstorm, which releases on April 11th, 2025. We are going to be reviewing all of the best cards in green from this set. And before we get into the cards, just like to ask if you enjoy this video, leave a like on it and subscribe if you want to see more. And if you want to support me and my channel, you can check out my Patreon linked down below. Kicking us off here, our first card is Enoch Wayfarer, which is going to be more of a vegetable card that will cantrip us for a land while also milling ourselves. Now, this doesn't beat out Satyr Wayfinder because Satyr Wayfinder will hit 4 cards from the top of our library, but I really just like these sort of vegetable cards in self-mill style of decks because it ensures that we continue to hit our land drops while also self-milling ourselves on a body that we can either chump block with or we can recur from the graveyard. Also, Enoch Wayfarer is a dog, so that means it does fit into potentially a Rin and Siri deck if you are into dog tribal. And I just like this again because it basically cantrips while self-milling us. The Necrobloom would absolutely love this card, and generally any sort of deck that wants to put as many creature cards or just cards in general into its graveyard. Our second card is Nature's Rhythm, which is going to be another X tutor to battlefield spell, much like Finale of Devastation, but it does come with Harmonize. And the cool thing about this particular spell is that because Harmonize requires you to tap a creature you control to recast the Harmonize, you could possibly chain together multiple creature tutors onto the battlefield by tapping the creature that enters the battlefield in order to cast that Harmonize from your graveyard. So arguably, this makes a run to kick out Green Sun Zenith from some decks because it just is a higher card density in terms of what this does offer you for 1 card slot. But generally, I personally don't run these types of effects just because I don't really like the tutor to battlefield effects because it just reduces the variance in your deck, and I feel like that's somewhat against the spirit of Commander. But if you are in any sort of Power Matters, Goreclaw deck, perhaps a Thawing the Gitrog monster, just any commander that's going to have at least 4 power to power up that Harmonize, then you definitely want to be looking at Nature's Rhythm if you're looking for a tutor slot. The third card today is Warden of the Grove, a 3-mana 2/2 at the beginning of your end step. Put a 1/1 counter on this creature, and then whenever another non-token creature you control enters, it endures X, where X is the number of counters on this creature. And most of the time, we're going to be putting X 1/1 counters on those creatures because this is going to fit right into a +1/+1 counter deck. So I think that this is the best form of this effect we've seen so far. Selesnya does have Good Fortune Unicorn. There's also Renata Call to the Hunt, but that has a downside in that it is both 4 mana and it is an enchantment, so it is a little bit more open to removal there. I really like Warden of the Grove because this is going to just continue to put on counters, and it actually puts a counter on itself so that if you're already running Hardened Scales effects, which you probably are in a +1/+1 counters deck, then you immediately start off with your creatures entering with Enduring 2 if we do have that Hardened Scales from that first counter being put on Warden of the Grove. So I really just like this in +1 counter decks. This is going to power up so many counters decks, such as your Hamza or Atraxa decks. Personally, I do have an Atraxa +1/+1 counter deck, and this will be finding a home in Atraxa. Our next card is Steward of the Harvest, which is a 4-mana 3/3 human druid. When it enters, exile up to 3 target land cards from your graveyard. Creatures you control have all activated abilities of all land cards exiled with this creature. Now, you can do absolutely busted things with this card, provided that you have the setup to get those lands in the graveyard in the first place. So the most busted thing I could possibly think of would be to turn all of your creatures into Nykthos Shrine to Nyx in some sort of a monocolored devotion deck. That would be absolutely insane, but you would have to get Nykthos to end up in your graveyard, meaning you would have to either self-mill it or sacrifice it somehow. More often than not, I think what this card is going to be is to make all of your creatures into fetch lands, because fetch lands just naturally put themselves into the graveyard. So this is going to be absolutely busted there. You could also make your creatures into Ancient Tombs, or possibly even little 1/1 infect creatures with Inkmoth Nexus and maybe one-shot an opponent there. Somebody check me on the ruling here, because Inkmoth Nexus does say Inkmoth Nexus becomes a 1/1, Blinkmoth artifact creature, and so I don't know if that necessarily applies to all of your creatures or if it's just shorthand for this card becomes a 1/1 artifact creature. So I'll have to do some rules lookups and maybe Editor Nathan can put in the final ruling here. So again, if you're in any sort of self-mill lands matter deck, Lord Windgrace, the Necrobloom, you might want to consider Steward of the Harvest. Then our next card is Rainveil Rejuvenator, a 4-mana 2/4. When this creature enters, you may mill 3 cards for some reason. tap, add an amount of green equal to this creature's power. So if this looks familiar, it's because it's Viridian Joiner. For 1 more mana, we get a 2-power creature so that we can start off producing a little bit more mana than Viridian Joiner might produce. I think this card is just absolutely excellent just as a generic ramp piece, although I will say it is competing with the likes of Sky Shroud Claim, which does have your forests enter untapped, which is really nice, and also color fixes you. So this doesn't color fix you, and it is vulnerable to board wipes. So, but the reason why you'd probably be running this is to either have, just extra blockers or any sort of reanimation targets, or something to do with tapping, untapping shenanigans where you're going to be making a lot more mana on a creature versus a land. So again, I like this in any sort of Mana Dorks Matter deck. Raga Draga is actually a really interesting commander for this card. In addition, Tyvar the Bellicose has each creature you control has whenever mana ability of this creature resolves, putting number 1 counters on it equal to the amount of mana this creature produced. This ability triggers only once each turn. So just a windmill slam into Tyvar the Bellicose. Then we move on to Will of the Sultai, one of the most powerful wills in this cycle. It doesn't really matter what the second mode says. The first mode is target player mills 3 cards, return all land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Just absolutely insane. Just yet another version of Splendid Reclamation and Lumra Bellow of the Woods. This effect simply wins games, folks. If you're in a self-mill lands deck, this is one of the, if not the best cards to see in your entire deck, short of perhaps Splendid Reclamation, which will be 1 mana cheaper. Here you do get the +1/+1 counters, and that's okay, but generally you're playing this for the land reanimation effect. So again, same commander recommendations here. If you're in land self-mill decks, Lord Windgrace the Necrobloom, this is going to be another windmill slam for you. And we move to Become the Avalanche, 6-mana sorcery, draw a card for each creature you control, power 4 or greater, then creatures you control get +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of cards in your hand, which is an interesting overrun effect, and I believe it's the first time that we've seen just a direct stapling of card advantage and overrun effect onto one card. The closest I could find that would have both of these would be like a Fecund Green Shell, which would be giving that buff only if we control 10 or more lands, but it does give us that card advantage stapled onto, toughness matters creatures entering. There's also Voja. If you have some card draw with wolves, then you could potentially get, like a nice overrun there with Voja. And of course, we all know the reputation of Voja being absolutely busted. So Become the Avalanche, it doesn't give trample, so it's not the most reliable overrun finisher, but it is going to at least refund itself, which is going to be absolutely excellent because I doubt that you would be casting this without drawing at least 1 or 2 cards. So this will go into all of your big stompy decks. Any, power 4 or greater matters decks. I have a Goreclaw Terror of Kalsisma deck. This would go great in, especially because Goreclaw gives your creatures trample. If you have a commander that gives evasion to your creatures, even better. So windmill slam into Goreclaw. And then Slinza is an interesting commander here as well because it says whenever Slinza or another creature with power 4 or greater enters, you can have Slinza fight target creature you don't control for 2 mana. So interesting pick there in Slinza, but definitely is going to find homes into Goreclaw decks. Then we move to Broodcaller Scourge. For 7 mana, we get a 5/7 flyer. Whenever one of our dragons you control deal combat damage to a player, you may put a permanence card with mana value less than or equal to that damage from your hand onto the battlefield, which resembles an Emergent Woodworm. For basically the same amount of mana, we can get that effect right away via the backup ability. And I don't think Broodcaller Scourge is quite as good as Kodama of the East Tree because Kodama is 1 mana less and generally cheats you for more mana over the course of the game. But Broodcaller Scourge is another addition to the busted green dragons, which is really cool because green is actually really short on just good flyers. And I'm glad to see that even if we do get a mediocre body, and that's even saying something that a 5/7 in green that flies is a mediocre body, but this is still going to generate a bunch of mana advantage for you. Is it as good as old Gnawbone level of mana advantage? Probably not, but this is probably, I would say, second to old Gnawbone in a dragon deck with green. So a Broodcaller Scourge, definitely an interesting dragon there. And of course, you can consider this in any sort of, big fatty deck, maybe a Goreclaw deck. It depends on your specific build of Goreclaw. This is a little bit, I would say, expensive to fit into Goreclaw, being that Goreclaw kind of wants you to run out a bunch of lower cost creatures, but could be a consideration in Kona Rescue Beastie as well, or any sort of Selesnya Dragons deck. Generally, if you're in in like red, or I would say probably the next best would be maybe black or blue in terms of dragons. So green kind of has the short end of the stick. So here I have Kona just as a more generic fatties matter type of commander that Broodcaller Scourge could find a home in. And that will take us to our honorable mentions. Our first card here is pretty interesting. This was in the main set review and I demoted it back to honorable mentions, but I'm considering actually if it really should belong in the main set review again. This is Herd Heirloom. Too many silent H's in that name. Add 1 mana of any color, spend this mana only to cast a creature spell, or we can tap to basically draw a card whenever target creature we control, power 4 or greater, deals combat damage to a player. Now, I initially thought, well, most people are going to think of this as an arcane signet. Of course, it only is used to cast creature spells, which could be a downside, but basically they're going to think of it as an arcane signet with upside because we can also use it to draw cards. But I think that because when you want to use this thing to draw cards, you are effectively paying 1 mana in quotes because you're giving up the opportunity to tap it for mana. So I almost look at this as a slightly better Lifecrafter's Bestiary, which used to see a lot of play in old Commander, but doesn't really see a lot of play anymore just because green has gotten better options for card draw. So, but while I was thinking of that comparison, I feel like it's still a little bit unfair because if we think about a card that goes into so many token decks, Idol of Oblivion is a similar templating where every turn we're basically paying 2 mana to draw a card every turn because we're always going to be able to get that token creation, hoop to jump through in order to activate the Idol of Oblivion. So Herd Heirloom is similar to that. So if I look at it from that lens, I would run Herd Heirloom in a deck, using that logic. But I just don't know. I feel like the two downsides with this card, also just being an artifact instead of being land rep in green, it is vulnerable to board wipes. So this might be a meta call depending on how many non-creature sweepers your meta tends to run. If there's a lot of farewells running around, a lot of the 8 mana MDFC board wipe, I can't remember the name, but I'll have that on screen as well, happens to sweep up artifact. Hour of Revelation, I believe, as well. So this is definitely a meta call, and I guess it also depends on if you synergize with artifacts in your particular deck. But Herd Heirloom, I guess in summary, is one card that I would like to test out a bunch before kind of finalizing my opinion because I'm not really sure what to think if it's good or not. Then our next honorable mention is Traveling Botanist, and I only mention this card because it goes great in RIP Spawn Hunter decks, which are looking for any sort of creature that benefits you in value from becoming tapped. So if you have a RIP Spawn Hunter deck, give Traveling Botanist a look. In any other deck, I probably wouldn't play this. It is a dog, so it could go in Rin and Siri ? But generally I just like this if you're running a bunch of tap untap shenanigans. And that will bring us to our top 3 green cards from Tarkir Dragonstorm, and if I could get a drum roll please, we have Will of the Sultai, Nature's Rhythm, and Warden of the Grove. Will of the Sultai, we're going to be seeing the most. I think people are going to be reanimating the crap out of their lands with this spell. I think out of all the cards we've discussed today, this one will see the most amount of play. Nature's Rhythm, just another busted green tutor spell that can be used for its Harmonize once it has resolved. So just an insane amount of card density here going on. And then Warden of the Grove, I think, is going to make its way into a lot of +1 counter decks by putting a bunch of counters on your creatures. So that is my green Tarkir Dragonstorm set review. If you guys enjoyed this video, leave a like, subscribe if you want to see more, and if you want to support me and my channel, you can check out my Patreon link down below. Finally, if you want to see all of my other set reviews from Tarkir Dragonstorm, you can check those out on screen now.